Welcome to Built for This, the podcast where purpose meets performance. Hosted by business strategist and human behavior specialist Carly Pepin, this show dives into the real stories behind high-growth businesses. Let's bring life to your vision.
Awesome. Well, welcome, guys. So today's going to be a really exciting episode. I have Channing Ferrer here, and he is the America CEO and head of revenue at Brevo, where he leads the company's growth and market expansion across North and South America. A seasoned operator in customer engagement and SaaS, Ferrer is known for helping businesses modernize how they connect with customers through unified, data-driven strategies. Under his leadership, Brevo has strengthened its position as a value-driven customer engagement platform focused on helping organizations build smarter relationships with their customer, drive loyalty, and scale efficiently. So welcome. It's so good to have you.
Thank you, Carly. Look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. So before we get started, so everyone knows what we're talking about, tell us a little bit about Brevo and what you guys do.
Sure. So we are a customer platform. We focus on helping companies through our software to do their marketing, omni-channel marketing. And they will use us often to do kind of a B2C focused marketing efforts. That's going to be through anything from email to WhatsApp to SMS or push notifications. We have customers like retail customers, e-commerce customers, and then other types of customers that typically use us for these tools.
Awesome. Okay, cool. And a little bit before about your history, because I know before Brevo, you spent about 6 years at HubSpot and you were part of taking it from a couple hundred million to over $1 billion in revenue. So when you're inside that stage of a company with growth, what does that actually feel like? Like what's actually going on to get the company to that point?
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity, of course, to be a part of HubSpot through that stage, but I've also been at earlier stage businesses too. So I've seen the differing approaches to growth, I would say, and there's kind of different stages you almost feel like you go through. So you go be a part of a growth business. When you get into that later stage of growth, which is still growth stage, but it's a slightly later stage of HubSpot or even where we are at Brevo now, you're over 200 million in revenue, which is about when I joined HubSpot, and seeing it grow. It's a more structured growth that you see. When you're in an earlier stage of growth, I'd call it less structured. But that later stage is a more structured. So what that means is you begin to make sure you have certain processes in place, and those processes have to drive efficiency and repeatability. You begin to look for growth coming from multiple products, not just one single product. So you have to have multiple product angles that are available to customers, so they aren't just buying one singular thing, but they buy add-ons or they buy other things, or you're targeting different ICPs possibly. Growth still comes in a very structured way through sales reps. So we do need to think about hiring of headcount, and headcount leads down the path of growth. And we look at hiring as a big driver of growth because sales reps carry quota, and that helps drive growth. So these are all the things that lead to a more structured growth. When you're earlier stage, it's a less structured growth. And I actually kind of think of it as multiple stages throughout, but that earlier, less structured growth is an exciting time also. It's just done in a different way. You don't need as many processes and as clear of roles always. So I'd say that's probably one of the bigger differences in that HubSpot era of growth.
Yeah, that's a really cool example. And I'm curious because in your experience, why do you think you don't need as much of the structure in the smaller stage of growth versus a larger?
Yeah, and so maybe I'll try to define structure a bit, even in context here. So when I think of that structure comes from having a certain number of sales reps on a team, and you add one or two more sales reps to that team, and those one or two more sales reps are going to generate a certain amount of output or productivity, and that's in my mind kind of very structured growth. Or you know that when you run one more field event, that one more field event is going to give you a certain number of MQLs and maybe SQOs that follow thereafter, and that's structured growth. The unstructured growth, that earlier stage growth, is saying we're going to do field events for the first time. I don't know how many MQLs I'm going to get from this thing, but let's try it and let's see what happens. And that's the unstructured growth. So you don't really know. You haven't yet proven things out yet, and it's fun, but it's a little more risky at times.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the difference in what I would call the structured versus unstructured growth.
That's awesome. I'm curious as well, in the larger scale growth, do you ever find that you're doing some of these unstructured activities where you don't have this certainty, you don't know how it's going to pan out?
Yeah, great question. Definitely, you have to. So and one of the reasons I tend to like this stage of a business, and I've been at this stage multiple times now between SEMrush and HubSpot and Acquia and Brevo and Brandwatch, is you do both actually. So you have the structured element. So we know that we're going to add a certain amount of headcount, and we're going to do certain things that are going to drive growth to because they're repeatable. And we've created this, we validate this kind of repeatability of certain angles for growth. But then you have to test stuff. You always have to be testing. You always have to be experimenting, and you have to try new things. And when you try those things, some of them are going to fail, some are not going to work, and that's okay. We know that. But we do need to find things that do work, new things that do work, because part of the stage of structured growth that we're talking about, it requires efficiency. You have to drive more efficiency. We can't just continue to add a sales rep at the same cost and get the same output from that headcount. We have to find ways to create efficiency. So we might find that new field events are a better way to create efficiency. New types of webinars, ABM is going to, in a new way, is going to work better. Chat bots on our website are going to drive more efficiency on our inbound lead flow. Whatever it might be, we've got to try some of these different things. And again, some work better than others, but we're always testing. We always have to be testing.
That's a really helpful example. I'm curious too, because as you guys are testing, and let's say you're trying something new and it's not working, is there a certain point where you kind of let something go, or is there a certain, like, how do you basically decide to choose whether you let it go or this is worth continuing to try to problem solve to move forward?
Yeah, so every time we're running a test or experimenting or trying something, we need to put a defined window of time on that experiment, and then we need to put criteria around that for that experiment. And some experiments will run at Brevo for a week, and that's it. And those are
Mhm.
usually more self-serve, high volume. We can make very quick decisions when we think about PPC spend, for example. We can do 1 week experiment on how we're spending our PPC and adjust quickly. Something like an ABM campaign, that might take 3 to 6 months to truly test it out and try it out. Going after a new market, again, that might take a longer window of time. But what's really important in all that is setting that time frame. Because if we said, let's go after a new market, and after a week it wasn't working, we don't really know in a week if a new market is working. It takes much longer. But if we use that same time frame, let's say of 1 week for every test, it wouldn't be accurate because certain tests require longer investment periods. And of course, you have to be conscious when we do a 6 month experiment. That's a big investment that if we don't like it, we're pulling back from. But we have to be, so therefore, we have to be as confident as we can going into that sort of an experiment. Say, yes, we believe strongly that this is going to work. Whereas when you do a 1 week test, you can be less confident. You can move a little faster.
Yeah, and I'm curious too, because especially in something where maybe you haven't tested it out before, how do you set these time frames so that maybe you're certain you're not setting unrealistic time frames, either too short or I'm sure sometimes it might even be too long of a time frame?
Yeah, I think it comes down to really the KPIs that you're measuring. So usually, whenever we're going to think of any sort of test or experiment or try something, we're going to identify, of course, our KPIs. And if the first metric that we put out there is closed won deals, and we know our enterprise deal sales cycles and 90-day sales cycle, we're looking at a minimum of 1/4 of time frame. And we decide that's too risky to run that, then we need to say, all right, well, let's not use closed won deals as the indicator. Let's use MQLs because we think it takes a month maybe for us to generate MQLs. Or let's use a different metric that we can identify earlier stage. And those earlier stage metrics aren't as closely maybe associated with revenue, but we can do some extrapolation by looking at MQL to SQL to closed won conversion rates and have a higher level of confidence therefore. So we kind of can pull back our KPIs and say, let's use these higher level KPIs because we're more comfortable with them. But some experiments, we might actually want to use SQO or closed won as a driving factor. And I'm talking marketing experiments now, but usually that's kind of how we'll think about it is what's the KPI and therefore what's the time frame to get to that KPI.
Awesome. That sounds like fun. Yeah. I'm curious too, just for fun, is there any particular metrics, I love metrics, and like KPIs that you've measured that are maybe unique or kind of a little off the wall, but that was giving you like a really cool like outcome or answer that you were looking for?
Oh, that's a good one. So I
Mm.
think there's a whole new set of KPIs that I don't know yet what they are, but I'm really trying to kind of figure them out around AI agents and productivity of agents. So a lot of the KPIs I've been more comfortable using are human-driven KPIs. And those are a little more straightforward, and there's a series of them, and we can play with them depending on the scenario. But agent-driven KPIs are a little bit more complicated. They're newer. They're things I haven't had as much experience. None of us have had as much experience with. So when we look at building up like an SDR agent, or even an internal agent that processes data, or an agent that sits on our website, or chatbot agents, the KPIs can be a little bit different there. And that's where we're kind of trying to figure out a little bit of what some of those KPIs are. And again, I think the SDR agent, or BDR, depending on how you call it, but that outbounding agent, we've got a couple of those that we've built now, and we're trying to identify what's the right metric there. Is it really, and I think there's a really interesting debate on this, is it really the legacy metric of saying how many qualified leads are we getting, how many touches are we getting, those sort of core metrics, or should we flip this upside down? Because with a outbounding agent like this, you can do high volumes of outbounding, whereas with a human doing outbounding, with a very kind of set amount of time and so on that they can manage to. But with automation, we can do an AI, we can do a lot more. So should we rethink those metrics and think of it just as touches, possibly? Just how many touches do we get? Because it creates brand awareness that all of a sudden actually isn't doing the same thing that an SDR had been doing. It's creating this kind of awareness measure that's maybe a more interesting measure. So that's, I think, just one. It's not as exciting as like a big new metric, but it's just a different way of thinking about using
Yeah.
automation to do something that humans were doing, but maybe the KPI is actually a different KPI as well.
That's really cool. Yeah, it sounds like you guys are just really being pushed to get very creative with like how you're measuring these systems, these processes now. It's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm curious as well. So I know that, when Brevo came along and offered you the position, it hadn't been a company that you had heard of before. So what was it about Brevo that made you want to come on to their company?
Yeah, so I had not heard of Brevo, as you said. Uh I've been doing some advisory work with a few companies off and on, and it's something I've been doing for the past several years, I think ever since really joining HubSpot. And Brevo, by the way, was known as Send in Blue prior to Brevo. So the Brevo branding really is only maybe 4 years old now. And I hadn't heard of Send in Blue either, but for context, if people had. So when they reached out to me and I took the call, because it sounded interesting, I looked them up and like, oh, it's an interesting space. I know this space pretty well. I started talking to them. I had just a quick call and I started talking with them. And what they were trying to do was two things that got me interested. One was they were trying to bring a European business into the US, going global really, but really, a driver of it was going into the US being the biggest market for them. So that's interesting. I've done a lot of the other. I've brought a lot of US businesses across the world and helped open offices and really grow internationally. So I've done a lot of that international growth, but I've never done it from Europe into the US. And so I'm like, it could be kind of fun, interesting challenge. I love new challenges, number one. And then number two, as they started talking, I started digging in. I really realized the market they were going after was this kind of mid-market space that was B2B, B2C, with a little more focus really on the B2C side. And to me, it felt like there was a gap there. I knew the players and competitors in that space. HubSpot is much more B2B focused. Klaviyo is really trying to push up market. They were in that small to mid-sized business space for a while, but they're really trying to push up market. MailChimp is a pure email player. They don't really have a full customer platform solution. So to me, it felt like it's actually a really nice fit in mid-market, kind of the low to high end of mid-market. And they were going to solve that gap that I'd seen in the market prior to running into Brevo. So I knew there was this market opportunity, kind of fun challenge. I said, let me join as an advisor. So I joined as an advisor for about a year and a half. And then as I got to know the team and Armand, the CEO, and we worked together for a while, Armand came to me and said, hey, I need someone to be the CEO of the Americas and to run our global revenue. Do you know two different people who could do either one of these two different roles? And I thought about it. I said, maybe I could just do both of them if you want. I said, sure. So worked out.
Hey everyone, it's Carly. If you're really resonating with what we're talking about and want to get clear on what truly drives you, what your core values are, head on over to my website. In the tools and tips section, there is a free values assessment. And this is a quick exercise that's going to help you to uncover what actually matters most with you so you can lead and live with more clarity, fulfillment, and momentum.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm really curious too. So bringing this company from Europe to the US, right? And I know you said you've brought a lot of US companies overseas. What would you say are some of the key differences of bringing a European company over to a US market?
So I'll start with some of the similarities and then we'll get differences. So the similarities are when you go into any new market, you have to feel local. And that's really important everywhere we go. So whenever I was at HubSpot, we were opening new markets. We wanted to try to feel it, especially in big markets, major markets. So that's one thing that's similar. Is you have to feel local, of course. And then when we go into those new markets, there's nuances in each market, and you have to be aware and conscientious of those nuances and adjust your positioning, your go-to-market strategy for those sort of nuances. So conceptually, two simple things, it seems like. The US
Hmm.
is the biggest market out there, the most competitive market out there in software. And so bringing a European or any company kind of into the US to make us aware is number one, very challenging because of competition. There's just so many players out there. The US um, market, the kind of for buying software and buying MarTech software, is also likes to test things, but is very quick to make decisions, much quicker than I'd say any other market. And so we have to be kind of ready for that speed and to operate at that speed. And then also the US market does the one nice thing I'd say in the US market, we don't really care where the company's from. We tend to, being an American myself, we tend to buy the best of breed product. And I love that about America. And that's one of the nice things of bringing any good product into the US. You can take advantage of that, which not all other markets are like that. We like that best of breed. But again, we make decisions quickly. We want to buy things that fit to our needs. And by the way, we do have different needs. We have some unique needs in the US versus outside of the world. And those are things like GDPR is very applicable over in Europe. GDPR doesn't really work and apply as much here in the US. Yes, we have certain laws in California, for example, that are similar to GDPR, but we have the Can Spam Acts, and that allows for different types of emails to be sent and different rules around how you send emails. And over in Europe, we're a little bit more open than Europe is, more restrictive. So adapting the product is really important when you kind of come to the US. So back to the differences, it's feel local, be local, which means sell with Americans. Don't sell with Europeans who are trying to be American. You have to be, again, local. Sell a product that fits to the market. So make sure we have the feature set that people need locally, and be ready for that quick evaluation. So those are kind of like the three things that I see very clearly.
That's cool. I'm curious too, because in that dynamic where you're like, okay, be ready for that quick evaluation, right? Be ready for the speed. What does that look like structurally on the back end to prepare for a jump like that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I notice is people like to test out products. And so
Mhm.
when I think of quick evaluation, people are very willing to jump in and try Brevo, but they're also going to make their decision pretty quickly if they like it or not. So we need to make sure that if someone wants to go in and test, and we offer a lot of self-serve capabilities for Brevo, that if they have problems or questions, that we can answer those questions. And either through automation, which is fine, but we have to be able to answer the questions. So either AI or humans need to be able to answer those questions. If we let them test our product and we can't answer their questions or solve their problems, then they're going to make a decision. They're not going to be patient and wait around and say, oh, okay, take your time. We'll take it another month and play around with it. No, they're going to make a decision. So we need to make sure we're set up to be able to answer questions and solve problems quickly. And so that means either having AI services that'll support those questions, having humans available to support those questions, but ultimately having a system and a process to be able to help answer people and get them up to speed on how to use the product.
Okay, that's very, very cool. And I'm curious as well. So, you mentioned that even there's a gap getting into the market, right? So the B2C, the mid-market, and you were very excited to solve the gap, but there's still a lot of competition, which I thought was interesting. Tell me a little bit about that combo. Like there's a
Yeah.
gap, but there's competition.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
obviously the U.S. market, as I said, very, very tight. So when you see gaps, they're like little slimmers of gap. They're not like big, wide open gaps. So in my mind, when I look at this little gap that I saw, the gap's much bigger outside of the U.S. actually. And so I saw a little slimmer of a gap here in the U.S. that felt like a good opportunity. Knowing that Brevo is a European company, that gap to me felt like it was probably going to be bigger outside of the U.S. I didn't know the European market as well as I knew the U.S. market for Brevo, obviously prior to joining. Now I do, but it made me feel like there's a bigger opportunity even outside of the U.S. So when I saw this, what I felt to be a gap in the U.S., and I validated that further looking at Europe, where Companies like Klaviyo are not nearly as broadly adopted and used. There's much more niche local providers, but those niche local providers I don't think are as strong as some of the more global providers. It helped me to kind of revalidate that the gap actually is a little bit bigger outside of the US than inside the US as well.
Okay, that's really cool. And I'm curious, are you also going even not just inside the US, but outside the US to a greater degree as well?
Yeah, we are.
Mhm.
We are. So we're headquartered in France, but we're growing a lot throughout Europe, and we're seeing success in countries like Germany and the UK. But we're just beginning to in other regions like the Nordics. We really haven't done much yet in the Nordics, and we're just beginning to. And one of the key growth drivers for our product, but also a lot of B2B marketing technology, is through partners, through marketing agencies often, and that's who we look to as a partner or multiple partners. So one of the paths for our growth is very much through marketing agencies.
Okay, that's very cool. So lots of partnerships. Do you guys ever do acquisitions by chance? Like, do you acquire companies that you're looking to expand upon?
We do. So we've made I think it's about 12 or 13 acquisitions in our history. We've been around for about that many years actually. And so we're continuing to look at acquisition opportunities right now. And we expect it to be part of our growth strategy going forward. And we'll be, strategic and thoughtful around those opportunities. In some cases, we integrate the product deeply into our product. In other cases, we may not. It depends, of course, on the scenario. But yeah, we've made a handful of them, and I would expect us to continue to do that going forward.
And what makes the decision for you guys whether to acquire versus whether to build something in-house?
And the decision becomes even more interesting now with AI and the ability to build
Yeah.
software so quickly, because now we can build, and anyone, even you could argue, can build software very, very fast using AI. So one of the things that's big for us is we think about our acquisition strategy. There's a couple angles to it. One of them is growing into a new region. So we can acquire our way into a new region as opposed to maybe ourselves organically growing into that region and acquiring a business that's already more established maybe in a country or in a region allows us to accelerate brand recognition and accelerate growth in that region. So that's one strategy that we use acquisitions for, where we're not going to build maybe for the region, but we're going to acquire our way in. And those acquisitions will be done knowing that there's a partner ecosystem that this company may already be using. There's sales reps and teams in place. There's brand recognition in place. So that helps a lot in our growth strategies. That's one angle. Another angle, of course, is more product oriented. And we say we need this feature, this set of features, these capabilities. Of course, whenever we look at that, there's the question buy versus build. And building takes time. It means we need to allocate resources here when maybe they were previously expecting to go over there. So is that worth the investment of shifting our resources to build something? Or are we better off just buying it and knowing that we want to do a lot of things at once? Let's keep our resources focused on this thing that it's being built, and then we will buy our way into this other thing that we want. So there's always a discussion and decision that needs to happen buy versus build. But again, I think it's an interesting topic, and it's always comes up if we decide this is a product decision, not necessarily a geographic expansion decision.
That's cool. I'm curious as well is when you guys are doing acquisitions, what's the decision-making process behind, am I actually going to integrate this company versus we're going to use it as a partner company?
Yeah. Yeah. So what we've done in the past might not be what we do, of course, going forward, but what we've done in the past is we focused a lot on integrating. And when we've acquired companies, for the most part, and some much more deeply than others, we've really tried to integrate. And a lot of that's come down to product decisions. So we've looked at the product and we said, we want to integrate this product deeply into Brevo, and therefore we're going to integrate the team deeply into Brevo. There have been some examples where we said, we're okay with this product kind of sitting off to the side. So it's not going to be deeply integrated. It's going to be just kind of off on the side of Brevo. And in those cases, it's often a slower process of integrating the teams. And we might not even fully integrate the teams. We might just keep the team kind of standalone as well. So it really depends on the product. The product drives how we think about the team being integrated.
Yeah. And I know that the main office is in France. So with these acquisitions, and some of them have been integrated, you must have a significant quantity of locations now.
Well, true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We
Right.
do. We try to be thoughtful about that though, because we don't want to spread out too far.
Yeah.
Um, So as we look at geographic expansion, we want to think, okay, for example, US is a great example of this. We have a team here in the US. We've got a couple offices spread throughout North America, including Canada. And if we were to acquire a business here, we wouldn't require the business to be in one of those locations. I think that's not a big deal. We could have another office. We're growing fast enough in the US that we would be comfortable with that. But I don't think we'd really be, unless if something very exciting came our way, start going and looking at making an acquisition, let's say in Australia. We're not going after Australia today that aggressively. We're not ready to. 2027, that might change. But today we get a bunch of customers and inbound leads, but we're not really looking to grow aggressively here in 2026 in Australia. So it would have to be a very compelling reason for us to say, let's do that. Time zones are more difficult. Of course, we have the English language, that's easy. But there's factors like time zones and other things and cultural integration with the team that can be much more challenging in that sort of an acquisition. So we will be thoughtful about location, and we do believe in having people together as much as we can. But it doesn't always mean, again, in the US, we have to hire or find a company that's in Boston or Austin or Toronto, where our major locations are in North America.
Okay, and I'm curious too, because even that dynamic of, you're like, we're not certain about Australia because of all the different variables. Are there any other variables that kind of make it, a go-to for the acquisition versus we're going to avoid going into this section of the world?
I mean, to be fair, yes, of course. And I think there's the geopolitical angles here that we want to be conscious of.
Yeah.
For example, we're not going to look for any acquisitions today in the Middle East. There's conflict going on in the Middle East, and
Fair.
we don't want to be a part of that right now. So we will make strategic decisions like that. I think when we look at a country like China, I don't know that we're ready to make an acquisition in China. There's challenges in operating a business in China that I don't think we're ready for, that complexity. In the future, those things, of course, can change, but I think there's decisions like that that will drive us. But aside from, I think, a small number of countries or regions, like I just mentioned, there's not a lot of other factors, I'd say, that would hold us back. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. And okay, so I'm also curious, when you did get started with Brevo, the growth was a bit more slow going. So what would you say were the biggest things that you saw that were turned around? What did that look like to be able to get that growth really moving in the US?
Yeah. So I think in the US, one of the things that we found is, as I was mentioning, this gap I saw, and
Mhm.
that gap existed in a range of kind of price point for a product. So one of the first things we said is, let's revisit our pricing and let's solve for that gap. And we came up with a mid-tier product. We have our enterprise product and we have our kind of starter product, but we came up with this pro tier product that really fit nicely right into where we saw that gap. And it's meant for small businesses primarily. Starts at $500 a month, and that has been taking off. It fit perfectly for the market. It's exactly what I think customers are looking for. So again, just creating kind of that product tier that fit nicely to where we saw the gap really has helped a lot. Number one. Number two is brand awareness. And our enterprise product is a great product. We have a ton of really big brands using it, but it's not as well known in the US. And it really fits well for the mid market. We call it enterprise, but it fits nicely right into the mid market space. So that brand, that product, we're really working on generating brand awareness and going to the big events. We were just at Shop Talk a couple weeks ago, which is the big kind of e-commerce retail event, for example, and getting our brand out there and doing other things to help build brand awareness. Because sometimes the challenge isn't a product challenge at all. It's just awareness challenge when you have a highly competitive market like we do in the US. So that's helped us a lot in getting introduced to the right companies and getting brought into the right conversations. We had a ton of really good. I was at Shop Talk. We had a ton of really good conversations out there, and a lot of people said, "I just started hearing about you guys, so I wanted to meet and learn more." And I'm like, "Perfect. That's what we were hoping for."
That's awesome. I'm curious too, because even that gap that you found, what was the process that helped you to uncover that gap?
So I think this was where I had the advantage of being in the marketing tech space for a while, and um, eh, I couldn't really put a finger on it other than just knowing the space, knowing the players and the competitors. Talking with companies pretty regularly, and even customers of these companies pretty regularly. So being in and around the space myself, it was kind of just for me a light bulb came on, and it was more of an intuition, a hunch, a simple view in the beginning. But then as you begin to have that feeling and that general understanding. You want to dig deeper. So I think really where it came down to for me was talking to customers and our customers or companies maybe that left us, or even partners that are our partners, or marketing agencies that aren't our partners. I did that sort of research myself, and it doesn't take a lot of these conversations, because within a small number of conversations, themes begin to come up, and you begin to hear the theme of Klaviyo's price is going up. A lot of people are frustrated. We want to pay for a smaller volume. We're a small business. We don't want to be pushed up in price. Um, MailChimp's a good product, but I want to do more than just emailing. I can't really do that with MailChimp. I want to have more capabilities. So these types of themes were what I started to hear. And once you start to hear them, you kind of begin to build confidence. And then you say, all right, let's test something. And here's the test. And change the price, change the product. Let's try that out. And that works.
That's great. When you launched this new product, right? So you have this new mid-market product. Was there a lot of structural change on the back end to be able to make this happen, or did it kind of seamlessly fit into the system?
Yeah, it's never easy actually to launch a new product, because we did have to feature gate. So we said these features are only available in the enterprise product. These other features are only available in Pro. So fortunately enough, being part of the advisory board, I was able to be a part of that decision making prior to even joining Brevo. And it did take us a little bit of time, not extensive, but a bit of time to set up the feature gating, to be able to have the Pro tier product available with the right capabilities built into it. But other than that, the actual kind of back end of the product really wasn't that different. So it's just feature gating, turning on and off certain features to say, again, certain features fit to enterprise, other features fit to Pro. The other thing that was a little bit complex was deciding on how do we support and service that product. Because if you have one sales team, one customer success team, one marketing team in place previously, and now all of a sudden you split it into kind of two products, how do you think about selling? Should the same seller sell both products, or should you have one seller sell one product and another seller sell another product? Same question for servicing. So those sorts of decisions were a little bit complicated sometimes. We were able to work through them and figure them out, but there are little details in there that are really important to figure out, I think, whenever launching a new product.
Yeah, I'm curious too, because how long did that process actually take to put these puzzle pieces together to ensure that you guys could launch the project?
Yeah, it was, I
Mhm.
mean, trying to think when we did the launch. We did the launch in October. It was close to a year, 9 months to a year, build up. And just to kind of get everything sorted and cleaned up, and then finally officially launched in October. Yeah, it was probably about 9 to 12 months really.
Hey everyone, it's Carly. So, if this conversation is really hitting home and you want to get a real snapshot of what's working and what's not in your business, head on over to my website in the tools and tips section and you can have the business performance health check. In just about 15 minutes, you're going to see where the friction is and where your next growth opportunity lies within your company.
Of work.
Very cool. Yeah, it's fun. I feel like, we talk about stuff and it sounds so simple, and then it's like, but how long did it actually take?
Yeah.
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 It takes a lot longer than we usually think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your leadership team is also spread out internationally, right? So I know you guys have some here, you have some in France. So how do you actually consistently stay connected on communication and being able to stay in that rhythm so you guys know what's going on globally?
Yeah, it's a good one. It's actually pretty tricky. We as I said before, we do believe in as much as possible in person, um, like in office in person, but we're not a full 5 day in office business. I'm remote, based in Boston. So my leadership team is split. Half of them are in Paris, half of them are remote or in the U.S. in Austin or Boston, and we of course have our regular weekly meetings. I'm a big believer in a weekly leadership meeting, and that meeting, we have a variety of topics that we cover. It's open for anyone to put topics into it. So I usually own about half of the topics that we cover, because I want to bring content that I know we need to cover off on. But then the other half is ad hoc from everyone. I have a person on my team who's head of our HR for the US, but she's also chief of staff for me and helping run communications for me. And it's something that I think is really important. It's one of the gaps that, as I joined, I didn't say I saw it as a gap, but I was concerned it could become a gap. So I said, let's make sure we lean heavily into how do we communicate and how do we talk. We have a lot of asynchronous discussions over Slack. We're big users of Slack. But also, I do believe having in-person time is important. So I'm in Paris at least once a month, meeting with the team members over there. I go down to Austin, Texas, where we also have some team members, and spend time down there when I can. So I'm on the road a fair amount, and that's not going to solve everything, but I do think creating those kind of in-person times, in-person environments really helps move things forward a lot faster when sometimes over Slack or over call, it's a little harder to do so. I find that when I'm in the office with people, it actually really helps us to go faster on topics.
Yeah, I'm curious as well, like even the weekly meetings, how long do the weekly meetings go for? What's the time schedule?
So and I'll say one thing from a revenue standpoint. I think it's really important to break apart your forecasting meeting from your weekly meeting. So I actually
Mhm.
have two weekly meetings, but a lot of, and this might be controversial to some people, but I believe the forecasting meeting is one topic, and there's too much content for that topic to have that blend into the other topics. So I like to run a forecasting meeting. That's a 45-minute meeting. We run that every week. When we get to the end of the month, we run that daily. End of quarter, we run it daily. So that's our forecasting rigor. And usually the last week of the month, we'll start running kind of daily forecasting meetings. Really, last week of the quarter, last 2 or 3 days of the month, I'll run it. And then the last week of the quarter, we run them daily. So that's
Mhm.
forecasting. And then separately, we run our team meeting. And then I also have one-on-ones that I run. And so the team meeting we run on Wednesday. I like to do it on Wednesday because on Tuesday, we have our executive meeting. So the exec meeting runs the business. I do the exec meeting. We'll take key topics out of the exec meeting, and then I'll bring that the next day into my leadership meeting on Wednesday, and share those topics. And other people have topics as well. So we run that for an hour every week. We use the full hour every week. Um, and I usually try to keep us moving along because sometimes you can get caught up on topics and spend a lot on those topics. But there's times where we'll have to go deep dive on a certain thing, and we might carve out a half hour in that meeting, just to go in on one topic if need be. Of course, there's times where we say, let's parking lot this topic, and we'll schedule a follow up because it's going to go beyond 20, 30 minutes of time. And in that case, we should shift it to a different meeting of its own. So we'll do that occasionally, but hopefully not too often.
Yeah, and I'm curious as well. It sounds like you have these meetings very structured, in the sense of just understanding exactly what you guys are bringing to the table, exactly like almost the cadence of the meeting. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would
Mhm.
say it's fairly structured, and I like to create some flexibility there. I think the structure that I like is to say, all right, let's have an agenda. Every meeting needs an agenda. So when we go into our weekly meeting, the agenda's preset. The woman who's my chief of staff helps us to kind of maintain the content. She'll go out and reach out to people ahead of time to make sure that they're inputting their content ahead of time, linking to documents or other things if need be, so we can kind of real time look at whatever's relevant. So we have that agenda. We'll look at that right when we get into the meeting. We see everything. People can click into the links if there's relevant documents to look at in the context of the topic that to be discussed. So that's very structured. Where I put less structure is I usually don't put time allocations on the topics. If there's a certain topic I know is going to go long, we'll talk about that. I'll talk to Verna, who's again chief of staff, ahead of time. We'll kind of allocate extra time for that particular topic. But generally, I try to just make sure we're moving along, but don't put hard stops on the topics, because sometimes things come up and you want to make sure you're spending enough time on that particular topic or piece of content. And the other thing is I let everyone put their own agenda items in, so they don't have to run
Yeah.
it by me or get a review or approval or anything. Put it into the document. It's an open document. Anyone can put it in, who's on the team, and we can cover those topics. And if we have too many topics in a week, then of course we'll have to figure out, do we need to postpone something or push it off? And occasionally we'll have to push stuff off. But usually whenever that happens, we can look at the topics and say, all right, we have 10 items today. That's a lot. These three are not time sensitive, so let's just put those at the end of the list. If we don't get to them this week, we'll cover them next week. That works pretty well.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for bringing that down. I feel like for anyone listening who doesn't like meetings, this is how you make meetings really enjoyable because when they're organized in the way that you're saying, they're very fun. It's energetic. It's very constructive. And sometimes even if conflict comes up, like you kind of work through it, and it's a nice ebb and flow. So I think you had a
Yeah.
great example of like how to make meetings fun.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And everyone has to be engaged. That's an important part of a meeting. I don't want people just sitting there for 60 minutes not saying anything.
Yeah.
So if it happens, I usually draw them in, pull them in into the meeting to ask their feedback on a topic.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm curious too, because traveling to Paris at least once a month, that's a lot, right? Like going international. So what would you say are some of the benefits of these in-person meetings that you're not able to get from the virtual that are really making a big enough difference for you to do that?
Yeah, and it's more than just the I'd say it's well more than the scheduled meetings. Where I get a lot of the benefit is the non-scheduled stuff. So when I go there and sit on the sales floor and have the chance to talk to our French partner account manager and ask her quickly, "Hey, how's it going with partner A, partner B? What's the latest?" And she says, "Oh, we're still waiting to get the feedback on this particular thing." And like that's a quick 3-minute interaction, but it's very hard to have that interaction over Slack or in an informal way without being in person, and talking to someone. So I get a more of a feel for what's happening. Number one, I can ask someone, "How's that deal going?" Or I heard, "Hey, congrats! I heard you won this other deal. Great job, congrats!" So all those little small little things is where I see a lot of the value, and I get a lot of information from those things. So when I'm walking down the hallway between meetings or going upstairs to the lunchroom to get some lunch because the French team loves a nice long hour lunch, which is great. I get a chance to talk with a lot of people and ask a lot of questions, and I'm learning a lot and communicating in both ways, listening and speaking a lot. So I find that to be where I pick up a lot of little nuggets of information, and then I can kind of use that information and kind of pull it together to help make a meeting more productive, or an agenda more productive, or follow up more productive.
That's very cool. I'm curious as well because I think this will lead into your 10% concept, right? Where you have, well, you can explain it to individuals, but yeah, explain to individuals that 10% concept because I feel like it kind of leads right into there.
Yeah, this is something our CEO pushed, and I love it. And I think I kind of naturally did this, but I never called it out before. So we call it our 10%. I should be able to probably have a better branding for that. But it's really 10% of your time should be allocated to doing individual contributor work. So any leader should think at least 10% of my time is doing individual contributor work. And where this gets interesting is as you have broader and broader leadership responsibilities, any one of us, how do you allocate that 10%? That doesn't mean that I'm going to be spending 10% of my time cold calling prospects. That's probably not an efficient use of my time. But I am going to spend 10% of my time maybe on some customer calls, maybe doing some RevOps analytics work, maybe helping thinking through a marketing PPC ad campaign that we're running. That's where my time gets allocated. And those are very granular little details, but that's really important for me to live in those details 10% of my time. If I do 100% of my time in those details, I have no time for strategic decisions and other things. So I need to find that balance. But at a minimum, 10% of my time should be allocated towards individual contributor type of work. And we have the same thinking across the whole business. All leaders need to be thinking this way. 10% of their time is doing individual contributor work. And it's a great way to ensure you're always close to the customer, ensure you're always close to your team members, ensure you're always close to really understanding what's going on.
Yeah. And how would you say it's really changed even the dynamic of how you move forward in the business as a leader, just being able to invest that 10%?
Once again, it really ensures that you have what we call boots on the ground. So boots on the
Mhm.
ground is one of our cultural sayings, and boots on the ground means you're right in the thick of it. You're doing the day to day, what drives the business forward, and it allows you to really understand the nuances, the nuances of the business. So
Mhm.
I think that's one of the most important things. As I was saying before, when I'm kind of walking around the Paris office and I have a chance to ask about a deal or talk about a specific situation, going even further is being on that customer call, or running that analytical report myself, and that allows me to fully understand what's going on. And I took this to a little bit further of an example the other day, where I decided I was going to build um, a a skill, a agent for us, and I built. So we've got a lot of different ways of building agents. I tend to default to using Claude, but we have a lot of other tools like that for AI agents. So I went and built a couple different agents for us, and it took me a little time to kind of play around and build those. But those are agents that we can use day to day, and what we do. And that's not me calling a customer, but again, it's more of a back office kind of ops thing. But I felt it very valuable to do because now I understand how easy or hard it is to deploy that agent. I worked with my sales reps to do a contract a few weeks ago, and she's new. She was getting her first contract done. She asked me how to do it, and I said, you know what? I've actually never done a contract before. Let's do it together. So we started doing it together, and it's like, wow, this is hard. We need to fix this. So right away, I hadn't known that before, how difficult it was to set up our contracts, and it's just the back behind the scenes. So right away, we're fixing this. We're going from probably what takes 30 minutes down to probably 5 minutes to set up these contracts. So I wouldn't have done that without actually spending 10% of my time creating that contract.
That's awesome. That's really, really cool. I also know you guys are a B Corp, right? So tell me a little bit about, is there any differences between running this company than maybe previous companies that weren't a B Corp? Is there anything else that you're thinking about, focused on?
Yeah.
Mhm.
There was a really good question raised the other day by a team member. We had a company all hands, and I was helping run it, and we were talking about using different LLMs, and I can't remember the full context. We were talking about LLMs, and she said, "Well, being a B Corp, are we being thoughtful of the repercussions of LLMs and the negative repercussions of LLMs?" And of course, when you look at the energy use and consumption, and also the displacement of people's homes, even that's going on because LLMs need these huge data storage, capacities, and need massive amounts of energy, and so on. There's a lot of negativity around LLMs that I think sometimes gets overlooked when we get excited about what AI is bringing forward. And it was a very good point she raised. And I think most companies would not have asked that. Most companies would have just thought, yes, let's plow through, let's get the best, biggest LLM available out there. And we need to be thoughtful. So when we make our decisions on using AI and using LLMs, we're also looking not just at what's the best, but what's at the best for us, what's the best for and this sounds a little bit esoteric, but for humanity as well.
Mhm.
And we're not gonna solve those problems, but if we are one of the companies contributing to thinking that way, we feel a little better. And we're not gonna stop using LLMs. We're not gonna stop using data centers and consuming power. We know we have to do that to be competitive, but we can do it in a thoughtful way, and we can do it in a way that we believe to be beneficial to the people who work for us and the people around us as well. So just taking that sort of a mindset, it's a slight shift. It's to say, you know what, we're maybe not going to use this AI tool or this LLM because we've seen what the negative news is or what's going on around them. We're maybe not going to do that because we're going to opt over here for that, for a reason that may exist. And it just helps you to refine your thinking a bit. And that slight change in thinking, if every company makes that slight change in thinking, it can have a pretty profound impact.
Mhm. I like it too because it's also not just thinking about the company, but thinking about like the world, like
Yeah.
people, and what kind of impact we're making. Which companies are such a great tool to do that. So it's like a great opportunity to just sort of weave it in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I'm curious as well, so even the dynamic of just keeping a pulse on, like, your cash flow as well, just saying cash flow positive, being able to have the cash flow to growth. What are some of the things that you focus on to ensure that you guys just aren't profitable, but you have really healthy cash flow?
Mm. Yeah. So I think when we think about that, we're really looking at, yes, we want to be a growth oriented business, but we also want to be a healthy business with EBITDA and cash flow. And we typically measure it through EBITDA, but it's really the same, kind of a similar, not the same, but a very similar metric. So we're looking at, how do we ensure we're efficient? How do we ensure we're growing in a healthy way that allows us to hit our growth targets, but also doesn't put us in a spot where we're overspending. There's a lot of businesses, and I might date myself here as I go back years and years ago, but there's a lot of businesses back to the dot-com era, from 20 plus years ago, that just spent through tons and tons of money at sales and marketing, let's say. And sales and marketing as a percent of revenue was like over 100% of revenue. In today's day, that would never survive, I think. I mean, there's still some
Mm,
companies that might try that, but it really doesn't work. So you have to be thoughtful. We're not going to over invest in marketing. We're not going to over invest in sales. We're not going to over invest in even product and tech, but we'll invest enough that we feel like will get us there in a healthy way. And one of the things that, for example, that we've been able to do is look closely at how AI helps us to develop faster, develop product faster. And if we can adapt, the faster we can adapt to leveraging things like Claude Code, the faster we can be more efficient and we can build product in a quicker way. One of our lead product engineers came to me the other day and said, this is again just a few weeks ago, well, it wasn't long ago. We were talking about a set of features we were trying to build. And it took us about a year to build these features. It was a pretty heavy investment for a team of like 5 people. And he said in probably 90 days, he could do this himself now using
Wow.
AI and coding. And just a big shift in how fast things can get deployed. So it makes us really step back every time and think, okay, we have to question, like, how long is that really going to take us, and are we doing it really the right way, the most efficient way? Because a lot of stuff you can go 10x faster now than you could 6 months ago on product development. So if you don't question things, we'll just go down the same path as we always did and still take the full year to build that. So we are constantly questioning, how are we building it? Are we doing it the most efficient way? How do we set our teams up for efficiency going forward as well?
Yeah, that's wild. Well, it even kind of goes back to the beginning where we were talking about just the time frames that you're putting on things, and it seems like those are now drastically changing. Like now, can we use AI for this? And now it's like, wow, I can cut this down to a far greater degree than it was before.
Yeah,
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 that's
exactly.
amazing. So, as you guys continue to move forward, what are the future goals of Brevo? Like, where are you headed?
Yeah, so we've got pretty big ambitions. We're talking publicly and globally about being $1 billion in revenue business. That's our goal. That's our ambition. We see that in 5 years. That's going to be a mix of organic growth and acquisition growth, a combination of the two. So we've got to hit acquisition targets to get there, but it's okay if we don't. But it's a nice goal to set out. As we think about growing, it's going to be global growth. So I think our brand and recognition will extend well beyond Europe and North America. I'd expect us to be well known in Asia and Australia in the future. So, but that's not far off. Again, I think within 5 years, that's all doable to me, and I'm excited to see it kind of come together.
That's amazing. Yeah, it sounds very inspiring. And I'm curious as well, if people do want to find you, where can they go?
Sure. So
Mhm.
best spot to find me is LinkedIn. I tend to try to be pretty vocal on LinkedIn when I can. So there's not a lot of Channing Ferrer, so it's pretty easy to find me. You can just search Channing Ferrer. You'll see me at Brevo, and follow me at LinkedIn. That's the best spot.
Perfect. I'm gonna put that in the show notes too, just in case anyone didn't find it. I really appreciate you coming on today. I really appreciate you sharing everything. That was so much fun. I feel like we got so much information.
Yeah, that was great.
Like a lot.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and if anyone enjoyed it as much as I did and found it as valuable, definitely forward it and share it on to someone else that you think it would find it interesting. And thank you again, Channing. This was really awesome. I really appreciate your time.
Definitely. My pleasure, Carly. Thanks a lot.